One of the most insidious signs you're dealing with someone who wants to destroy you is how they exploit your vulnerabilities. This process rarely begins with visible malice. Instead, it often starts with what appears to be genuine interest. They ask questions. They listen intently. They create space for your pain to be seen, as if they care deeply about your story. You might feel relieved, even grateful, to have finally found someone who seems to understand the battles you've fought, the scars you've carried, and the loneliness you've endured. But behind that attentiveness is not compassion, it's calculation. They are not collecting your truths to protect you. They are storing them for future use as weapons. It usually begins in subtle ways. A story you shared in confidence gets brought up later in a heated conversation, not to comfort you, but to cut you. Something deeply personal you once mentioned, a childhood trauma, a professional failure, a fear about your self-worth, is now being used to invalidate your feelings or dismiss your arguments. They take the very parts of you that required safety and weaponize them to destabilize your sense of trust. What once felt like intimacy starts to feel like betrayal, and the confusion that follows is exactly what they want. It makes you question whether you can trust anyone, even your own instincts. The use of your vulnerabilities against you doesn't always come through direct attacks. Often it's laced in sarcasm, passive-aggressive remarks, or jokes that sting more than they amuse. They may mock the things you once trusted them with, turning your raw honesty into a punchline. Over time, you become hesitant to open up. You start censoring yourself, unsure of what will be thrown back at you the next time you speak your truth. This is no accident. It's emotional conditioning. The goal is not just to hurt you, but to train you, to make you smaller, quieter, more dependent, and easier to control. The cost of vulnerability becomes too high, and eventually you stop sharing at all. In healthy relationships, vulnerability is sacred. It's met with empathy, not exploitation. But to someone whose aim is control, your vulnerability is a roadmap. It tells them exactly where to strike. If you struggle with abandonment, they'll become distant to trigger your fear. If you have insecurities about your appearance, they'll make subtle comments that keep you self-conscious. If you've ever felt not good enough, they'll reinforce that narrative until it becomes your inner voice. What they're really doing is installing shame where there was once healing. And once that shame takes root, they don't have to control you. You begin to control yourself on their behalf. They don't always act alone in this manipulation. Sometimes they introduce your vulnerabilities into public spaces around friends, coworkers, or family members. They may disguise it as concern, saying things like, "She's just really sensitive about that," or "He tends to overthink because of his past." On the surface, it may sound like they're defending you, but beneath that is an intentional effort to define you by your pain in the eyes of others. They plant seeds that shape how others see you, casting you in a light that makes you seem unstable, fragile, or emotionally unpredictable. This isolates you further, making it harder to build new connections or seek support outside of the relationship. Once they have established this control over your emotional narrative, they use it to justify their own behavior. They'll claim they didn't mean to hurt you, that you're only reacting this way because of your past, not because of their actions. They minimize your experience by attributing your reactions to trauma instead of acknowledging the damage they're causing. It's a manipulative cycle. They trigger the very pain they claim to be concerned about, then invalidate your response by blaming it on that same pain. This keeps you stuck in a loop of self-doubt where you're constantly questioning if you're the problem and overlooking the real harm being done. When you're dealing with someone whose intent is to control or destroy you emotionally, one of the most defining patterns you'll notice is their constant creation of chaos. They don't seek peace. They don't crave stability. Instead, they intentionally destabilize the emotional environment around them because chaos gives them power. The more emotionally unsettled you are, the more control they have over your decisions, your thoughts, your energy. And they often stir the chaos without ever appearing to be the cause of it, which makes it even more insidious. On the surface, they may even act like they're trying to keep the peace, when in truth, they're the one lighting the match behind the scenes. This chaos doesn't always look like loud arguments or explosive fights. In fact, it's often much quieter, more manipulative. It might come in the form of mixed signals, inconsistent behaviors, or constantly changing expectations. You never quite know where you stand with them. One moment they're loving and supportive, the next they're cold, dismissive, or critical. You begin to live in a state of hypervigilance, constantly trying to read their mood, anticipate their reactions, and avoid triggering their next emotional outburst. You lose track of your own needs and identity because your mental energy is fully consumed by trying to keep things from falling apart. They use confusion as a weapon. When you confront them about something they said or did, they deny it or twist the narrative so deeply that you begin to question your own memory. This gaslighting is a deliberate tactic. They want you to lose confidence in your perception of reality. When you can't trust your own thoughts, you become easier to manipulate. You start apologizing for things you didn't do, accepting blame for things you didn't cause, and doubting yourself even in the face of clear truth. In their world, clarity is a threat to control, so they make sure it's constantly out of reach. These people often create drama between others as well. They might gossip, lie, or subtly pit people against each other. Coworkers, friends, even family members, they thrive on division because it shifts attention away from their behavior and keeps everyone emotionally unsettled. In environments where trust is eroded and tension is high, they emerge as the one who understands or the person everyone is trying to appease. They position themselves at the center of the emotional storm they created, acting either as the victim or the peacekeeper, depending on what benefits them most in the moment. It's a power play disguised as dysfunction. You may find that you're constantly on edge around them, your nervous system in a perpetual state of anxiety. You hesitate before speaking. You rehearse your words. You avoid sharing your honest opinions. And still, despite your efforts, conflict seems inevitable. That's the design. They create impossible situations. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, so that no matter how carefully you navigate the relationship, you're always the one left feeling like the problem. They maintain control by ensuring you're always the one reacting, while they remain just removed enough to deny any responsibility. What makes this pattern so difficult to recognize is that it often mimics the chaos we've normalized in past relationships or even in childhood. If you grew up around emotional volatility or inconsistent affection, part of you might mistake this instability for passion, complexity, or love. But real love doesn't feel like tension. Real love doesn't require you to abandon your peace just to maintain connection. When someone keeps you in a state of emotional survival mode, that's not love. It's manipulation designed to wear you down and weaken your boundaries. People who intend to break you down rarely start with blatant attacks on your self-worth. They understand that overt cruelty raises alarms, invites questions, and risks exposure. Instead, they operate in the shadows of subtlety, choosing micro cuts over deep wounds, knowing that slow erosion is often more effective than outright destruction. They chip away at your confidence quietly, deliberately, and over time, so you don't even notice the damage being done until you're questioning your every move, doubting your own voice, and seeking their approval to feel worthy. It often begins with offhand remarks or innocent, sounding critiques that don't seem aggressive on the surface. Maybe it's a simple, "Are you sure you want to wear that?" Or, "That's not how I would have handled it, but okay." These comments may not sting at first, but they're carefully designed to plant seeds of doubt. They aim to make you second guess your judgment, your choices, your instincts. And when you react, when you express hurt or confusion, they frame it as you being too sensitive or always taking things the wrong way. The more you push back, the more they insist that you're the problem, not their words. That kind of emotional gaslighting works slowly but powerfully. It erodes your self-trust. Their tactics extend beyond direct conversation. They may undermine you in front of others in subtle but strategic ways, interrupting you when you speak, correcting your stories, or adding unnecessary clarifications that make you seem unreliable or uninformed. In professional settings, they may reframe your contributions as their own or downplay your successes with backhanded compliments. Around friends, they might speak over you or act dismissive when you share something meaningful. Each of these small behaviors communicates the same message. You are less capable, less competent, and less valuable than you believe. This constant undermining doesn't stop at what you do. It attacks who you are. They may poke fun at your personality, saying things like, "You're too emotional, you always overthink everything," or "You just don't get how the real world works." These are not random observations. They are strategic character assaults. They are meant to shrink your identity until you become more malleable, easier to shape, and easier to control. When someone convinces you that your natural traits are flaws, they make you feel like you have to change yourself just to deserve love, respect, or acceptance. And that's exactly what they want, to make you believe that being fully yourself is somehow wrong. Over time, this erosion of confidence begins to seep into every area of your life. You hesitate before making decisions. You apologize more than necessary. You stop taking risks, avoid new opportunities, and defer to their opinions even when they conflict with your own values. You may even start to preemptively criticize yourself in your mind, as if trying to beat them to it. That internalized self-doubt becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You show up smaller in the world, less certain, less visible, and increasingly dependent on them for validation. They have shaped your inner narrative to reflect their control. And the more you believe it, the stronger their grip becomes. What makes this form of manipulation so dangerous is its invisibility. There's rarely a single moment you can point to and say, that was the attack. Instead, it's the accumulation of countless little slights, dismissals, and criticisms that blend into your everyday interactions. And because it's often disguised as concern, humor, or even love, you find yourself explaining it away, justifying their behavior, or worse, blaming yourself for reacting to it. You begin to believe that maybe you are too sensitive, too insecure, too needy. That confusion is precisely the tool they use to maintain control without appearing abusive. Their goal is not just to make you feel less than. It's to make you believe you are less than. Not just occasionally, but fundamentally. Because once you've internalized that belief, you become less likely to challenge them, and less likely to reclaim your worth. The act of diminishing someone's confidence isn't always loud or violent. It's often quiet, slow, and calculated, hidden in the words you weren't supposed to notice and the silence that made you feel invisible. One of the most telling signs that you're dealing with someone who does not have your best interest at heart is how they gradually isolate you from those who do. This tactic rarely begins with outright demands to cut people off. Instead, it often starts subtly, with a raised eyebrow, a dismissive tone, or a comment that makes you doubt the people who love you. They might say things like, "I just don't think your friends really understand you," or "Your family always seems to judge you." These phrases may sound protective on the surface, even loving, but the intention behind them is manipulation, not to support you, but to separate you from your emotional lifelines. They understand that your friends, family, or colleagues can serve as mirrors, reflecting your reality back to you when things feel distorted. Those who truly care for you may notice patterns of mistreatment, shifts in your behavior, or changes in your self-esteem. And people with toxic intent can't afford that kind of accountability, so they slowly insert doubt between you and your support system, planting seeds that make you question the loyalty, intentions, or sincerity of the very people who want to help you. Over time, you begin to retreat from those relationships, not because of your own judgment, but because someone else is reshaping your perception of them. The isolation process is often disguised as emotional intimacy. They want to be the person you turn to first, and eventually the only one you turn to. They may say things like, "I feel like I'm the only one who really gets you," or "You can talk to me about anything. Why do you still need to go to them?" It's presented as closeness, as if they're building a sacred bond with you. But what they're really doing is monopolizing your emotional world. The more dependent you become on their presence, the more power they gain. They know that once you lose your circle of support, you'll be more vulnerable to their influence, less likely to seek help, and far easier to control. Over time, the isolation becomes more obvious. They may begin to openly criticize your relationships. Friends become toxic, family becomes manipulative, and anyone who sees through them becomes jealous or threatening. If you resist, they turn the pressure up, saying that if you truly cared, you wouldn't allow these people to come between you. This forces you into a painful choice: keep your connections and risk emotional punishment, or surrender them in the name of peace. Many people give in not because they want to abandon their loved ones, but because they're exhausted from the emotional warfare and just want things to feel stable again. What's even more painful is the guilt they instill. When you do spend time with others, they act distant, sulk, or pick a fight afterward. Their message is clear: when you connect with people outside the relationship, there's a cost. They may accuse you of changing or being influenced, or claim that others are trying to turn you against them. This is not just jealousy, it's psychological control. They're creating a world in which your loyalty must always be proven, and the only acceptable way to do so is through isolation. You find yourself walking a tightrope, constantly trying to balance your need for connection with their ever-expanding demands for exclusivity. This kind of isolation doesn't only affect your social life, it impacts your mental and emotional health in profound ways. The people you once leaned on for perspective, encouragement, and truth are now distant. And in their absence, you begin to lose touch with your own identity, without others to remind you of who you are outside this relationship. You start to see yourself only through the lens of the one controlling you. You forget your strengths. You minimize your needs. You silence your instincts because you've been taught that to be close to them, you must be distant from everyone else, including yourself. The consequences of this isolation go even deeper than loneliness. It creates a vacuum where doubt, fear, and emotional dependency thrive. Without outside validation, you begin to question your reality. You wonder if you're being too harsh, too sensitive, or too disloyal. You replay conversations in your head, trying to determine if you were wrong. You crave approval from the very person who's creating your pain because they've positioned themselves as your only emotional source. This is not love. It's a form of psychological captivity. And the longer you remain disconnected from others, the harder it becomes to remember what healthy connection even feels like. One of the most psychologically exhausting tactics used by someone with destructive intentions is their ability to flip the narrative and make themselves the victim whenever they are confronted. This behavior is not accidental. It's a calculated defense mechanism designed to evade accountability and maintain control. You may approach them calmly with facts and concern, hoping to resolve an issue, but as soon as the conversation shifts toward their actions, They retreat into victimhood. Suddenly, the person who hurt you is now hurt by you, and you're left wondering how you became the one apologizing in a conversation that began with your pain. This reversal often happens so fast and with such emotional intensity that it destabilizes you. You might bring up something that made you feel uncomfortable or disrespected, and they respond not with acknowledgement or empathy, but with a counterattack. They accuse you of misunderstanding, of twisting their words, or of being unfair. And if those tactics don't work, they take it further. They cry, withdraw, shut down, or imply that your criticism is abusive or ungrateful. Their goal is not resolution, it's deflection. By making themselves appear wounded, they change the dynamic of the conversation. You stop focusing on your valid concerns and start trying to comfort them, calm them, or prove that you didn't mean to cause harm. They exploit your empathy as a weapon. If you're someone who deeply cares about how others feel, they use that trait against you. The more sensitive and conscientious you are, the easier it is for them to manipulate your emotions. You may leave the conversation feeling confused, guilty, or ashamed, even though you were the one seeking clarity and fairness. This tactic creates a psychological bind. Any attempt to hold them accountable is framed as cruelty, and any expression of your pain is perceived as an attack on their character. Over time, you begin to silence yourself, not because your feelings have changed, but because you've been trained to expect backlash whenever you express them. These manipulative reversals are not limited to private conversations. In public settings, they may portray themselves as the long-suffering partner, friend, or colleague who is endlessly misunderstood. They tell stories in which they are always the victim, overlooked, betrayed, mistreated by others. This image makes it harder for people to believe or support you when you eventually speak out. They carefully curate their persona, not for authenticity, but for protection. By convincing others of their innocence, they create an environment where your truth seems questionable. And if you try to expose them, they twist it into another chapter in their victim narrative. Look what they're doing to me now. This victim-playing behavior also serves another sinister purpose. It isolates you emotionally. When they portray you as the aggressor, they invalidate your perspective and erode your right to be upset. You may start to think, maybe I am overreacting, maybe I am the problem. That self-doubt is a form of emotional control. They don't need to shout or threaten to silence you. They just need to make you believe that your feelings are unjustified. The more you internalize that belief, the less likely you are to challenge them again. Eventually, you start editing yourself before you even speak, anticipating their response and avoiding conflict not out of peace, but out of fear. What makes this pattern even more confusing is that at times they may genuinely appear distressed. Their tears may be real, their sadness may seem authentic, but it's important to understand that emotional display is not the same as emotional accountability. Feeling hurt when confronted does not absolve someone of responsibility. Yet, in these dynamics, their feelings are always prioritized over your facts. Their discomfort becomes the center of gravity in every disagreement. And you, the person trying to advocate for yourself, are cast as the villain simply because you dared to name the harm. This constant inversion of roles keeps you in a state of emotional disorientation. You never know whether bringing up an issue will lead to a productive conversation or an emotional meltdown. You start to walk on eggshells, choosing silence over truth because it's easier than being made to feel cruel or heartless for speaking up. And every time you retreat, they gain more control, not just over the relationship, but over your perception of reality. When someone seeks to control or eventually harm you emotionally, their strategy often begins not with conflict, but with imitation. This is the most deceptive and seductive phase of their manipulation. When they mirror your desires, values, passions, and pain to build a false sense of connection, they study you carefully. They listen, but not out of empathy. They watch you closely, but not to understand you. Instead, they absorb your identity like a blueprint and then reflect it back to you, creating the illusion of profound compatibility. It feels like you've finally found someone who gets you, someone who speaks your emotional language, someone who finishes your sentences. But what you're experiencing isn't intimacy, it's mimicry with an agenda. From the very beginning, they seem to like everything you like. If you love art, so do they. If you hate dishonesty, they claim to value honesty above all. If you talk about past betrayal, they reveal how they've been betrayed too. They don't just agree with your thoughts, they validate your worldview in a way that makes you feel seen, understood, and emotionally safe. This creates a powerful emotional bond. You feel like you've met a kindred spirit, someone who shares your rhythm and reflects your soul. But what you don't realize is that they're not revealing who they are. They're becoming what you want. And it's not love that motivates this, it's power disguised as connection. This mirroring is especially dangerous because it disarms your natural boundaries. You let your guard down faster. You trust deeper. You confide sooner. You open up without hesitation because it feels like they've already been where you've been. The connection seems effortless, even fated. But beneath the surface, there's an agenda. They're not earning your trust. They're manipulating your trust through performance. Every time you share a part of yourself, they reflect it back strategically to reinforce the illusion that you are soul aligned. What feels like resonance is often just calculated resonance, carefully curated to bind you to them emotionally before their real behavior emerges. As time goes on, the mirroring becomes a tool of control. Once they've won your trust and devotion, the reflection slowly changes. What was once alignment begins to shift into subtle dominance. Suddenly, the things you loved together are no longer shared. Now, they determine what matters. The music you bonded over fades from their playlists. The values they echoed start to crack under pressure. But by then, you're already invested. You feel emotionally indebted. You've told them your story, shared your trauma, bared your soul. To walk away now would feel like ripping out your roots. That's exactly what they count on, that by the time the mask starts slipping, you'll be too entangled to leave. When conflicts arise, they use the information you gave them during the mirroring phase to manipulate you further. They'll echo your words back at you, twist your values to serve their arguments, and weaponize your past to win the emotional upper hand. They'll say, "I thought you believed in forgiveness," or "Didn't you once say you struggle with trust?" Maybe that's what's happening here. They reframe the conversation using the same language you once found comfort in. But now it's used to confuse you, destabilize your judgment, and make you second guess your feelings. It's like watching someone wear your voice like a mask, and suddenly that voice is being used against you. What makes this tactic especially difficult to confront is the shame and disbelief that follows. Once you realize the connection was built on manipulation, you question everything. Was any of it real? How did I not see this? Why did I fall for it? These questions are brutal because they cut into your sense of self-awareness. But the truth is, mirroring works because it preys on the most human desires to be seen, to be loved, to be understood. They don't win because you're weak. They win because they exploit the strongest parts of you, your openness, your empathy, your hope. And by the time the illusion starts to collapse, you've already attached meaning to the bond that never truly existed on their end. In moments of doubt, they may try to reinitiate the mirroring. If you pull away, they may suddenly become the old version of themselves again, the one who loved, believed what you believed. They'll mimic the connection again, just enough to keep you tethered. They may remind you of how much you have in common or how special your connection is, but now you can sense that something is off. The words are the same, but the energy is hollow. What once felt like shared passion now feels like manipulation cloaked in sentimentality. And yet, because of the emotional history they manufactured, part of you wants to believe the original connection was genuine. That pull between truth and illusion becomes the battlefield inside your mind. The tactic of mirroring is among the most deceptive forms of psychological manipulation because it bypasses logic and strikes directly at your emotional core. When someone with destructive intentions targets you, they don't begin by showing hostility or control. They begin by becoming exactly what you've been searching for. Someone who seems to reflect your ideals, dreams, and even your pain. They mirror your energy, your habits, your morals, your goals, and your wounds. This isn't about genuine compatibility. It's a constructed illusion, meticulously designed to pull you in and disarm your skepticism. You won't notice it at first because the signs feel like chemistry, connection, even fate. But it's not a shared bond. It's bait. This person doesn't reveal who they are. They reveal who you are and then pretend to be that. If you're spiritual, they become spiritual. If you're passionate about a cause, they suddenly express deep concern for the same thing. If you talk about books, music, or life philosophies, they mirror your tastes so precisely it feels uncanny. They act like they've experienced similar traumas, overcome the same obstacles, and grown through the same lessons. This engineered closeness creates instant trust because it convinces you you've found someone who truly gets you on a soul deep level. But they aren't showing you their true self. They're giving you a reflection of your own, designed to build emotional dependence quickly and quietly. Once they've earned your trust, you open up. You begin to share the deeper parts of your past, your fears, your hopes. You become vulnerable in a way you usually reserve only for those you believe are safe. And why wouldn't you? They've mirrored your heart back to you in ways no one else has. What you don't see yet is that this openness is being logged, stored, remembered, not for care, but for control. Your values become data. Your dreams become leverage. Your insecurities become tools they can use later to shape the way you think, feel, and behave. This is not a connection. It's a strategy, one that relies on silence, sincerity, and speed. Their mirroring doesn't just mimic your interests. It mirrors your emotional frequency. If you're intense, they match your intensity. If you're quiet and reserved, they meet you in stillness. If you speak in metaphors, they speak in poetry. If you're raw, they're raw. They construct a version of themselves that fits seamlessly into your world. And it's so tailored to your inner landscape that it's hard not to believe you've met your mirror soul. That's the danger. It feels not only natural, but predestined. You ignore red flags. You override gut instincts. You forgive early inconsistencies because nobody's perfect. And this level of connection must mean something. But over time, the cracks begin to show. The mirroring can't be sustained forever, and eventually subtle shifts appear. They begin to show preferences that contradict the ones they first mirrored. Their opinions start to assert themselves more aggressively. They may become irritated when you expect them to uphold the very values they once claimed to share. You're confused. You try to understand the change, but they offer vague answers, suggest you've changed, or deny the inconsistency altogether. By now, though, you're invested. You want to make sense of the bond, to restore the closeness that once felt so real. You question yourself, not them. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, emotional, or insecure. When you attempt to address the shift in behavior or voice discomfort, they might reintroduce elements of the original mirroring to reset your doubt. They suddenly remember what matters to you, act interested in the things they previously discarded, or bring up deep emotional conversations from earlier in the relationship. It feels like they're reconnecting, trying again, rebuilding. But it's not about healing. It's about retaining control. They know exactly what to say to reignite the emotional bond you once felt, even if they never actually felt it themselves. That calculated return to who they were is a tactic, not a transformation. The emotional damage from this manipulation is profound because it creates a fracture between your heart and your reality. You believed you were understood. You believed you had found safety. You believed this person saw the real you. But what you were truly seeing was a projection crafted by someone who never had the intention of protecting your heart. It leaves you questioning your ability to judge character, to trust your instincts, to recognize real love from performance. You might even begin to wonder if you imagined the connection, but you didn't. What you felt was real. What they showed you was not. And that dissonance is what makes this form of manipulation one of the most emotionally violent forms of betrayal. There is a unique kind of fatigue that comes from being entangled with someone who is slowly draining your emotional and spiritual energy. It's not like the tiredness you feel after a long day or even after an argument with someone you care about. This is something much deeper. It's the kind of depletion that settles into your bones, your thoughts, your inner voice. It's the exhaustion of constantly managing someone else's mood, anticipating their reactions, and sacrificing your emotional needs just to keep the peace. The longer you remain entangled with someone who operates this way, the more disconnected you become from yourself, and the more numb you feel to the world around you. These individuals don't deplete you all at once. They do it gradually with small emotional withdrawals that seem harmless on their own. Maybe it begins with their constant need for reassurance or validation, or their frequent mood swings that you feel responsible for regulating. At first, you try to be understanding. You make excuses for the behavior, telling yourself they're going through something or just need time. But what you don't realize is that their emotional patterns are not circumstantial, they're consistent. They need to be the center of emotional gravity in every room, and that gravity pulls everything, including your joy, in their direction. You start noticing how heavy you feel after spending time with them. You might feel anxious before seeing them, emotionally raw after leaving, or unable to enjoy your own solitude without carrying the weight of their expectations or criticisms. They might not shout or scream, but their presence demands something from you, a constant output of emotional labor that's never acknowledged, never reciprocated. You listen to their problems endlessly, but when you need to speak, they go silent. You try to express your needs, but the conversation quickly circles back to them. Over time, you stop sharing, you shrink emotionally to accommodate the immensity of their presence. This kind of emotional draining is especially damaging because it operates under the guise of connection. They might say they love you, that they care deeply, that they can't live without you, but their actions say otherwise. Love does not suffocate. Care does not exhaust. Real connection should replenish, not require you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And yet, you find yourself doing exactly that, burning through your reserves to make them feel okay, sacrificing your rest, your peace, your dreams, just to keep the emotional temperature stable. And no matter how much you give, it's never enough. Their needs expand. Your strength diminishes. They also drain you spiritually, not necessarily in the religious sense, but in the way they make you feel hollow, uninsured, disconnected from your own soul. You begin to forget what used to light you up. Hobbies feel dull. Inspiration disappears. Laughter becomes scarce. You feel like a muted version of the person you once were, less vibrant, less hopeful, less alive. This loss of inner aliveness isn't just collateral damage, it's often intentional. They want you emotionally dependent and spiritually depleted because people in that state are easier to control. When your inner flame is low, you're less likely to walk away, stand up for yourself, or believe you deserve better. And it's not just what they leave behind. In the void they create, they implant self-doubt, fear, and emotional confusion. You begin to feel like you're never enough, never calm enough, supportive enough, strong enough. You start carrying emotional burdens that don't belong to you. You internalize their unhappiness as your failure. This is not just draining, it's reprogramming. It alters the way you see yourself. You go from being grounded and whole to fragmented and fragile. They don't need to isolate you physically because they've already isolated you internally from your intuition, your peace, your purpose. Over time, even your body starts to feel the cost. Chronic stress, sleepless nights, tension in your chest, tightness in your stomach. Your physical form becomes a container for emotional weight that was never meant to be yours. You may start withdrawing from others, canceling plans, skipping things you once enjoyed, all because you're too emotionally depleted to engage. They don't just drain your energy in the moment, they disrupt the flow of your entire life. And yet, because the erosion is gradual, you often don't realize how deeply you've been affected until you look back and barely recognize the person you've become.